In the panel liaison for, thank you, whoever turned that on, for the session, making sure that you're in the right session. This is 3.4, collection of judgments. And we have a great panel lined up for you today. Our moderator is Jason Blazakis, who is Professor of Practice and Director of the Center on Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism in Middlebury Institute of International Studies, which just I found out was in Monterey, actually, instead of in Middlebury. In any event, I commend you to the QR code that's up on the poster there. We ask that your questions be submitted to the moderator through the use of the QR code. We are having this live and by live stream, and we're expecting a great program, and we're not going to take a long time with speaker bios, because the bios, we commend you to the programming where the bios are fairly complete. And so with that, I'm just going to turn it over to our moderator, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, panelists. Great to see you in person. First time I've met my fellow panelists. It's wonderful to be here to talk about a really important issue. We're talking about collection of judgments. This is the third track, the legal avenue track. And as with other plenary sessions, we're not going to spend a lot of time on biographies. I will say I am really excited to be on this panel with my colleagues. I spent a lot of time in the U.S. government, 20 years, tracking terrorist financing of a number of organizations, groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And I'll tell you, one of the best ways to hit bad actors is in their pocketbook. And I'm really excited to hear about some of the strategies we're going to learn about today in terms of trying to hurt extremists who are hurting individuals in the online space, in the real world. And tackling the challenge of financing related to extremists really impacts them in a number of ways. Their ability to mobilize supporters. And we're going to hear from Tanya a really personal story about how an individual mobilized supporters to harass her and her family. It allows for the recruitment of new individuals into organizations, and it allows for organizations to thrive through the financing of organizations. It allows for the organization to metastasize. And the radical right in particular, the people that we're going to talk about today on this panel are really good at, unfortunately, mobilizing supporters to bully their perceived enemies. And they often are able to fund their activities through a number of licit and illicit means, to include the use of cryptocurrency. I'm really excited to hear from Daniel and Megan in particular when they speak about strategies to try to track pseudo-anonymous payments going to individuals who are perpetrators of hate, because cryptocurrency is very difficult to trace. Now, in terms of sequencing, we're going to begin our panel today with Tanya Gersh, who's going to answer, I think, that so what question, this question of why we are here, because her very personal experience has animated the activities of my other three panelists. Beth, who has had the great fortune of representing Tanya in a very difficult court case and pursued this court case and won an amazing judgment against a very bad actor that Tanya is going to tell you about. And then Daniel will be speaking next, and he's going to talk about some of the strategies he's deployed to try to collect on the judgments that Tanya and Beth won. And then Megan has the very difficult job of trying to find some of these assets that are subject to this judgment. Because one thing I know is bad actors, they don't like to pay up when they lose in court. And we're facing that situation as it relates to Tanya's specific situation, but it is a situation that is facing other victims of extremism. So with that, I want to turn the floor over first to Tanya Gersh. If we can get the first slide up, that would be fantastic. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm just a mom. I'm a mom from Montana, and I'm also a real estate agent. And I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was hired by what turned out to be the mother of a neo-Nazi to sell her building. And later that night, I went out with some friends, and I'm sorry, not that night, but in this time period, I was out with some friends. And I got a phone call from my husband that said, Tanya, you need to come home. You need to come home right now. My husband never asked me to come home if he doesn't need me. I knew something was weird right away. And I went home, and my front door was locked, which is very weird because in Montana, we live in Disneyland. It's literally like the safest place in the world. And I didn't have keys to my house, so I had to knock on the door, and my husband had to come and let me in. And I walked in, and the house was completely dark. So I knew, again, something was really wrong, and my husband just said, Tanya, I really have to show you something. I have to show you something. And I said, what's going on? He said, come up, come up. I walked into the house, and the house was completely dark, and all the shades were drawn. And the only light in the house was a laptop that was sitting on our bed in our bedroom. And I could see from the glare that there was also luggage sitting on the floor. And I said, what is going on? And he said, Tanya, you have to see this. And I opened my laptop, and he turned the laptop to me, and there was my face. There was my face on a website called The Daily Stormer with that star on my forehead. Okay, so I didn't even know anti-Semitism existed. I grew up in Idaho. I was living in Whitefish, Montana. I never watched the news. In my mind, everyone's handling things. This is the best life in the world. We've been reading The Diary of Anne Frank in 8th grade classrooms for 30 years. We have so won this war. So in that moment, I found out that not only am I the target of 300,000 followers of the Daily Stormer, but the Daily Stormer and all these haters actually exist in this world. The best way to describe it is that I felt completely de-virginized. So we read on the website, trying to figure out how this happened and what they were saying, and essentially they published my life. They published my contact information. They published my husband's contact information. They published my Facebook page, my Instagram page. They published my place of business, and they published all of the social media accounts of my 12-year-old son, and said, go get him. These Nazis called their followers their family. He said, okay, family, are you ready for an old-fashioned trail storm? We're gonna go get her. Their goal was to bring me to the brink of suicide without actually having to touch me. And my life changed in an instant. You know this term, scared shitless? It's real. I was in therapy for months with a physical therapist to learn to not pee my pants anymore. And I always thought I was a tough cookie. The days that came after this moment were very bizarre. Thousands of messages came into my home via email, social media, text messages, phone calls, saying things like, you should have died in the Holocaust with the rest of your people. Watch out, because we're going to come get you. Your children should be scared. You should be scared. The most vile and disgusting threats that you could ever imagine. And this was to a girl who has done nothing in her life but just try to give to her community and give to her family and be a helper. I was a PTA volunteer from the time my kids started kindergarten. And I was also a girl whose son was currently studying for his bar mitzvah. And I had to explain this to my children. Babies, we're part of something really, really scary right now. And no, I'm not sure if we're safe. Yes, I know that that was just a policeman over at our home. Yes, that was FBI. Yes, and there will be a policeman that will be following you to school every day to make sure you're safe. And yes, we are hated by a lot of people. And I had children that said, oh my God, there aren't very many Jews in this little town. Are my parents on the right side of history? If Jews have been hated for so long, maybe there's a reason. I experienced the pain of having to go through this with two little boys. So one day when we got a phone call from Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, I'll never forget writing that down on a piece of paper. I had no idea who SPLC was, but I handed it to my husband, who is an attorney. And I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw those, and he said, SPLC, as in Southern Poverty Law Center. And I said, yeah, here. And he's like, give it to me. And he raced to the phone. And on the other line was Richard Cohen. And he explained to us what was going on. He explained to us, Tanya, these guys they're bad people, and they have been harassing people, and they have been spreading false lies. They are a American neo-Nazi group, and we want to come out and visit you and explain to you what's going on. They came out, they spent some time with us. They did a lot of detective work over a few weeks, and then one day they sat down with us. I'll never forget, at the kitchen counter, and they said, Tanya, Judah, if you be our plaintiff, we can take them down. On that day, remember the luggage that was sitting on the ground in my room? Those bags were still packed. They were still packed and on the floor, and the only reason we didn't run is because I could not take the pain of telling my children we are running for our lives in the year 2016 from Nazis. And I remember glancing over at those pieces of luggage and looking back up at the lawyers, and I said, sign me up. Look, we have been taught, I was taught since I was a little girl, that when things get rough, you fight like Queen Esther. I come from a nice Jewish family, and these things are instilled in us. During Hanukkah, you learn the story of the Maccabees and how hard our people have had to fight. I had a lot of role models, and this was my time to be role model to my children. Because if I didn't, the memory of the hatred would be what they were left with. So I signed up. And the lawsuit was filed. I went through 2 years of the lawsuit, which was a wild experience. I often explain this time period of my life as being Alice in Wonderland, falling down the rabbit hole of learning to become a speaker and tell my story, which I had never been before. And I remember my lawyers telling me, Tanya, Beth told me this, all you do is be your best self and tell your truth. And slowly in those 2 years, I went from a victim that was peeing my pants to a fighter for social justice, because I realized that what I was doing was setting a huge precedent to these haters, not to mess with people because what they are doing is not right. During that time period, I stayed in therapy. I'm still in therapy. There's still, you can hear it in my voice, a tremendous amount of pain. This fundamentally changed me. This fundamentally changed my family. But I'll tell you what, I feel like Queen Esther. I feel like Queen Esther because we fought, we won, and a federal judge awarded us $14 million. We will never see a penny of that $14 million. You know, it's like, that's for them to discuss. That was like, I never expected that we would see a penny of the $14 million. I never expected it. We knew that that wasn't what we were doing this for. And even if I did, I couldn't keep it in my hands. But what I did want was to teach a valuable, valuable story. And I did want my boys to finally realize, Mom, we're on the right side of history. So that's my story. I did also, I remember asking for one thing. You know, I know that I won't have money to pay back my medical bills and pay for therapy, but I wouldn't mind owning the dailystormer.com. I want the Daily Stormer. And that leads to the next speaker.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Tanya. Thank you for your strength and for setting the stage for what do we do next to make sure that there is a judgment that can be fulfilled. So Beth, could you tell us a little bit about your work with Tanya and how you proceeded to win this legal victory?
Sure. So I joined SPLC after the lawsuit had been filed, and I joined SPLC after being a civil rights attorney for about 17 years. ACLU, and then there's another organization called Lambda Legal. It's kind of the gay CLU, doing impact litigation. But after Trump came into office and we saw the rise in right-wing extremism, I literally joined SPLC, you know, to sue Nazis, is what I said. And I said it flippantly. And then my first case was suing, let me tell you about Andrew Anglin, this vicious, notorious, neo-Nazi, racist, white supremacist, and anti-Semite. Just the worst of the worst. And this guy founded it's a blog. It's called The Daily Stormer, which is the English translation of the German word for the propaganda paper that was published in the lead up to and during World War II to villainize Jewish people, right? And this blog is, do not read it. Trust me when I tell you, it's the most vicious, vile, awful thing you've ever read. It's anti-Semitic, it's racist, it's misogynistic, and it does something that a lot of these other sort of right-wing blogs do, which is it's masquerading as a news commentary opportunity. So they take something that has been written about, it's like just a little excerpt, and then they give their opinion about that, which is, of course, filled with all this racism and anti-Semitism. And then they allow people to just comment and comment and comment. And, of course, the only people who would, you know, spend more than half a second on the Daily Stormer are, you know, people who want to continue to propagate this kind of hate. So the way that so that's a little bit about Andrew Anglin. Of course, you've met our plaintiff, who is just delightful, right? Just minding her own business, doing good things in the town of Whitefish. And the way this unraveled is that there is another neo-Nazi who is a part-time resident of Whitefish, Montana. His mother owns some property there. His name is Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer had already had some notoriety, but then after, I think it was within days or maybe the night of the 2016 election, he was videotaped giving a Heil Hitler salute to Trump. He said something that sounded very much like Heil Trump and raised a glass, straight-armed, and the room full of Nazis gave him, a Nazi salute back. And that went viral. And in this small town, this small liberal Disneyland-like town of Whitefish, Montana, filled with a lot of different folks, but a lot of progressives, it seems to me, there was a response to that. That was, we've been tolerating this. They knew he spent time there, but what are you going to do about that, right? And they decided that they should do something. What can we do just to ensure that Whitefish isn't associated with this Nazi? And so Facebook, a little community groups, someone suggested he owned a building with his mother in town. It had some businesses in the bottom. Maybe we should protest. Maybe we should hold a protest and sort of send a message. And the good Ms. Gersh saw that, knew some people who rented there, and thought she should give them a heads up, or give them an understanding of what might happen. That is all she did. She took a phone call. So after she expressed, what was going to happen, one of these people that she talked to that rented said, "Would you be willing to talk with Sherry Spencer? Richard doesn't own the building anymore. Sherry, I think she might listen, take some advice from you, and maybe she wants to sell the building. Yes, I will, tell her she's welcome to call." So it was that phone call in which she just gave some advice. In fact, my understanding is that Sherry asked, "How much do you think the building is worth?" She let her into the building so that she could assess. She gave a best estimation. She was going to represent her. That innocent and effort to be helpful was twisted by Nazi number one, Richard Spencer. So when he found out that there was some kind of a protest and directed at him, he posed as his mother, and he posted an article on a place called Medium, which is sort of an open source website where you can write articles. So he wrote it under Sherry Spencer. We found that out during discovery. And in it, he did just enough damage. He focused on Tanya. He said that she was trying to, that she had threatened to bring, protesters down if Sherry didn't sell the building. And then one of the conversations I think you had with Sherry was, "What do you think Sherry Spencer said, "What do you think I should do?" And Tanya said, "Well, if it were me, I'd sell the building, I'd give some proceeds to a human rights organization, and I'd make an announcement denouncing the racism that we saw your son exhibit and that, was connected to him." And so Nazi one spins this into Tanya putting conditions. If you don't sell the building and you don't issue a statement, then we will come after you. None of that is true, right? So why didn't we bring a defamation claim? That's lawyer wonky stuff. I can talk about it, but I may not have time to do that. But Nazi number two, and this is a thing that this is, one of the ways that you might, unfortunately, get catapulted into the right-wing echo chamber, is that he took that Medium article, used it as news, and other right-wing blogs and websites also used the language from that and then twisted it to say, and this is what Andrew Anglin said, was that that Tanya was the head of a Jewish cartel, of a Jewish criminal racketeering, cabal, just took all of the tropes, the worst Jewish tropes, and spun it around to create the kind of hate-fueled terrorism and harassment that she talked about here. So that's, so one article, nope, 30 articles. Article after article after article, ginning up his base. He calls them his army, his troll army, for what he called a troll storm, what is in fact is a harassment or a terrorism campaign. And like she said, all of their contact information. But that's not far enough. He also suggested and gave an easy way for people to contact the licensing, the Real Estate Licensing Bureau, and the bar for her husband. And I will say that while he directed this at Tanya in general and identified her, that the Jewish community of Whitefish, small as it was also in the crosshairs, right? So the rabbi in town and businesses who were supportive, they called, there's an organization called Love Lives Here, and they'd put some stickers up, and they were also sort of harassed, but not in the way that Tanya was. And so in terms of the lawsuit, number one, we had the conversation with Tanya, and she agreed basically to take the heat, like to be the person who stood in the vortex and stood up against this. After we became involved, we did two things. First, we filed a cease and desist letter to some organizations or entities that only smarter people than I know what they do, like Cloudflare, DigitalOcean, like storage spaces, security, things that helped.
I got you.
Thank you. Prop up. But all we could do, we couldn't get them to take down the articles, but we could get them to take down the pictures, right? Because those were copyright protected. So that was the first step. Then we filed the lawsuit. So, the harassment went on. I think you're probably still getting death threats to this day. But the article stopped cold turkey when we filed the lawsuit. So in terms of impact, the impact was immediate in that regard. And then there were a couple of rounds of the litigation that I think kind of show some patterns when you're litigating in the space. The first was getting what's called personal jurisdiction, serving that rascal, which I know is just a ridiculously nice word to describe him. But he claimed not to live in the United States. He claimed that, and if you can't serve him, the court doesn't have jurisdiction, so he has to be a U.S. citizen. And so, we sent investigators. We could not physically serve him. We did some investigations. We found out that he had registered to vote in Ohio, where his parents were from. We suspected he was hiding in their basement somewhere, but and also some sort of checks that he cashed in Ohio. We had some evidence that allowed us to proceed, and then we served him by publication. And then he fought that. He hired a self-proclaimed First Amendment defense attorney, fought jurisdiction, but couldn't prove that he lived anywhere else. So he's like this digital nomad. He couldn't prove he lived anywhere. We had some evidence. We had jurisdiction. Gotcha. Game on. Round two were the claims in the case, actually what we were suing over. And this gets tricky, right? Because we get this thing called the First Amendment. And because he didn't call her, he didn't contact her that we know of. He told other people to do so. And he, as they all do, has this caveat, by the way, we're against violence, right? So hit him up and tell him how you feel. Like they all know what that means, right? And so we sued directly for a tort called the intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's the tort of outrage. It is rarely successful, often talked about in law school. It means that you have done something that is so beyond the bounds of decency as not to be tolerated in a civilized society. We were like, yep, check. I mean, that's a pretty high bar, but like, check. We also sued for a type of invasion of privacy called trespass upon seclusion. You have a right to be to your own sort of zone of privacy that people can't come into. Well, they certainly did here. And he is indirectly responsible, we said, because he substantially assisted that, which in Montana, there's a good little theory that allows somebody who substantially assists in the bad action to be held liable. And they also have something called an anti-intimidation statute. If you're doing something legal and by threats or intimidation, someone interferes with that, you can sue. I think all states should have that. We're going to talk later at 4:30 about other sort of challenges to bringing this kind of litigation, and having laws you can use is one of those challenges. So the precedent that was created was at an early stage. And so basically it was this First Amendment lawyer claiming First Amendment privilege, that he's, number one, a reporter. We blew that one out of the water very quickly, showing that it's just a blog. But secondly, that the First Amendment protects speech. Nothing happened here. All he did was talk. There's a First Amendment right to free speech. And luckily, the court rejected that argument and agreed with us that that there are certain kinds of speech that are not protected. He said this is a matter of public concern, and we said hogwash. This is at most a real estate dispute. This is a personal vendetta for some reason against this poor woman. This is not public, concern. And their argument was like, what? It's talking about the Jewish race. That's clearly political. This political speech. The courts again said, first of all, agreed, and this is kind of, what everyone needs to understand. There is no First Amendment exception for morally reprehensible speech. So the court acknowledged that, but said you can't wrap up what is essentially a private concern in reprehensible political speech, and then that somehow gives you a pass. So no, it's not a matter of public concern. There is no First Amendment protection, and we were able to proceed. So that took all the wind out of his sails. And then we, were engaged in what's called discovery, where we tried to get information to prove our case. We got to depose some Nazis, which was its own interesting and pathetic, honestly, because the two Nazis that I deposed, one, her life was made pretty miserable by getting sucked into that vortex. And the other, by the end of it, was almost crying. Please don't tell my wife. She doesn't know. She's mad that I've gotten involved in this, and denounced everything because they're in basements. They think it's all, no one knows. This isn't all of them, but some of the people who get sucked in. Whatever. The discovery, blah blah blah. Then we tried to depose Andrew Anglin himself, which he'd have to come. He said he was offshore. He said he'd have to do it here in America, and he didn't want to show up for that because there's lots of people looking for him, trying to get money from him. So he didn't show up, and we got what's called a default judgment. Then we got to go to trial to prove the damages, and that's where Tanya and her husband gave testimony about the harm. Her therapist gave testimony about the deep and enduring and potentially permanent harm she endured, and yes, and also the lost earnings because her reputation had taken such a hit. So we got a $4 million, I'll get it wrong here, $42,438 judgment for compensatory damages, the harm that happened and the future harm, and then 10,000 punitive, 10 million. Thank you. It added up to 14,042 and change, right? And we also got an injunction, a permanent injunction, making sure that he took it down. So now the trick is, after we toasted and danced around and, got this great both precedent and judgment is how to collect. And I got to tell you, as a civil rights attorney, I don't have a clue. And we put a call out to some pro bono law firms who were willing to help SPLC with the work that we do, who have bigger brains than I, and enter Paul Weiss and Dan Kramer, who has been engaged in a multi-year effort to get property, get money, and otherwise collect on this good judgment.
Dan, thank you. Thank you for suing Nazis, Beth.
Yeah.
And that's really important work. And in the context of what you can do domestically against extremists vis-a-vis foreign extremists, the toolkit is smaller. You can't sanction domestic extremists in the United States like you would sanction ISIS as a foreign terrorist organization, which means the work that Daniel's going to describe on how we can potentially collect, and not just money, but other things too that he's going to talk about that actually hit the Nazis hard to take away their propaganda pieces. So hopefully Tanya one day can own Daily Stormer and do something good with that. Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about some of your strategies you've been deploying to collect?
Sure. Can we put up the PowerPoint? And by the way, I could not be more thankful than to be working with this group, the courageous Tanya Gersh, the brilliant Beth and Megan at Southern Poverty, wonderful partners who just do incredible work day in and day out. And so when I got the call about this and they said, we've gotten this terrific judgment help us figure out what to do next. I could not have been happier to get that call, and the Paul Weiss Army could not be happier to work on it and see if there's anything good we can do. And let me talk through a little bit of the challenges we've had and what we're looking at. I think it is not uncommon in these cases against white supremacists to have people who are essentially judgment-proof, don't have a lot of money, or are underground and either hiding in the U.S. or hiding abroad, or people who are underground and have money, but keep it in crypto and other ways to try and keep it hidden. So this case had all of those challenges, and I think those challenges are common to a lot of what we're seeing. And the one message out there in the universe I want to send to all of our colleagues is, please, 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 after you do your victory dance and you get your judgment, realize that you're only halfway there, okay? You have to continue. You have to continue on. So, all right. We got the judgment. Beth described the judgment very well. It was unbelievable. We were so bowled away by what they had been able to accomplish in Montana. And so the first thing is, you have the judgment, what do you do? What everyone does in this situation is you get discovery after you get a judgment. You're able to send document demands and subpoenas to try and get information about where people have assets. And that's the first thing everybody does. And you have to do it for a couple of reasons. One, you may get good information. But two, it also sets up other judgments you can get later in the case. Here, because we had someone who had gone underground and who had conducted his business in a way so as to try not to be discovered, we had some strands to follow up. But for the most part, this guy was a coward, and he was going to stay in the shadows and stay away from us. But we were going to keep the pressure on so that if he ever did pop up, we would be able to grab him and get his information. So I guess that step number one for Tanya was making sure that this guy felt scared, knew someone was watching, and felt he had to stay hidden. Step number one. So that's the first thing we did. The second thing is the Daily Stormer, which at one point, purportedly, Megan will tell us if this is true or not, was the most widely read Nazi publication, I don't know if they said in America, in the world, whatever it is. The Daily Stormer was still up and still had incredibly offensive posts on it. So step number two, in terms of post-judgment, is to get those posts taken down. And it was interesting. How do you do that? Where do you start? Well, in a very non-legal sort of common sense way, we sent them a letter. And we said, take it down. England never responded to us, but within a couple of days, the posts were down and they were gone. Okay. All good. Then when we didn't get responses to our post-judgment discovery requests, we moved to compel discovery. It's all, you have to take this step by step by step to get where you want to go. And we wanted to keep the Montana court focused and involved and not have years go by between the judgment and coming back. We wanted this refreshed in their mind. So we made a motion to compel, and the court granted our motion compelling England and others to respond to our requests under threat of sanctions. Then what do you do when they don't respond? You make a motion for contempt, which we made, and the court found him to be in contempt and said that if he did not act to cure contempt, the court would issue an arrest warrant for him. So he did not cure his contempt, and we now have a recommendation from the magistrate judge that the judge issue an arrest warrant. So yes, so it's all just in keeping. I mean, there's so much you can do if you think about it. We're hoping any day now we'll actually get the arrest warrant, and again, letting him know we're watching, we're on him, we're keeping tabs. Now, Tanya's goal, one of her goals at this point, is to own the Daily Stormer. She actually does. She's actually a co-owner with two others, right? With Ms. Dumpson and Obadala, Mr. Obadala, right? Other people that England had gone after. Essentially, we played whack-a-mole with him because he would run from one hosting domain site to another. Anytime we saw there was a domain hosting the Daily Stormer, we went after the domain and we said, you're hosting a site that violates your policies. You're hosting a site as to which we have a legal judgment against. We want you to give us the rights to the site. And we would either get the rights or all of a sudden the domain would go down to be reestablished elsewhere. I think at this point we have we own 16 Daily Stormer domain names. And there are a couple more out there. You know, there's one, I think in Afghanistan domain and one in a Russian domain, whatever. And so some of them are going to be hard to get, but we do have the great majority of them by far, and the most popular ones. And stay tuned, and we'll hear back from Tanya and others what they want to do with the Daily Stormer domain. And after I speak, Megan's going to talk about what the effect is every time someone is able to take away a domain name. So we've been active in that. Here's something I'm going to talk a little bit about, but not a lot about. It's what almost everyone in these cases wonders about, and that is, can we get cryptocurrency? A lot of Nazis solicit donations. They solicit donations in crypto, different cryptocurrencies, and they do it because it's supposed to be hard to track and figure out where it is. We developed some methods for getting information about crypto transactions out of wallets related to the Daily Stormer and Anglin and his Confederates. Megan will talk a little bit about that. I am reluctant to go too far into it, other than to say we've gotten some really important information about transactions and about individuals involved in the transactions. And I'm going to leave it at that, but it's an area that we're very focused on and continue to do a lot of work on. So that's a little bit of the things I can talk about that we're doing. There are a couple other things I can't quite talk about, but let me say to the people watching this on the net, to our friends, let me just tell you, this part of the case, the judgment collection part of the case, is incredibly important. It's a place to really be creative, and it's so important that we drive these folks into the shadows and make them look over their shoulder constantly, and that we never let up, or as Tanya told me yesterday, we have to fight like a Maccabee. And that's what we're going to do. So let me stop there. And
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And I think the broader point of persistence is extremely important, because this is a long battle to claim what is now rightfully Tanya's and others who have been subjected to abuse online. It's a very difficult challenge. It involves a lot of data, and I think that's a good segue to Meg and what she's doing at the Southern Poverty Law Center to help collect on the judgments, and how she's using big data to figure out what people like Angling is up to.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Megan Squire. I'm the Deputy Director for Data Analytics and OSINT at SPLC. Thanks for the slide. And I'm just going to outline with graphics a few of the ways that I and others on this team have been working to try to find Andrew Anglin. I do more than just finding him, but I'm able to apply some of those techniques to this very interesting and very important case. So one of the things that we'll do is use trace data, so trace information that comes from people's usage of web properties, websites. And Anglin's very online, right? He operates all these websites. He chats with people online. He does all kinds of online activities. And so one of the ideas that I had, and I actually got this from tracking someone else entirely, was to look to see about posting behavior. So when they act online, how do they post? When do they do that? From where do they post? And so this is an example, just a quick snapshot of posting behaviors. The black areas are when the person is not posting online, and the white areas are when they've made a post on various social media and other online properties. So we can start to see maybe some patterns emerge where there's darker areas. They don't tend to post at that time, and we can start to see clumps of those together. I've got these going back for Mr. Anglin, probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years worth of data, but this is just a little bit. So we can start to put this together with other things to see how he's moving, what his behaviors are, and so on. So far, it's still a work in progress. I have learned, though, that he keeps to the Eastern time zone, regardless of where he is in the U.S., and that is probably to coordinate his writers and his publication schedule. So kind of interesting. We learn little facts here and there. So we also, crypto has been mentioned a few times, so this is just a quick screenshot of some of the cryptocurrency some of the wallets, and it's really small and hard to see. But this came from an article that my colleague Mike and I did at Southern Poverty Law Center, tracking a variety of extremist crypto users. Andrew, of course, was one of those. He got into it way back in 2014, encouraged by some of his fellow racists and anti-Semites to get into this new form of currency that would allow them to make money on a more secretive basis. So he's been in crypto for almost a decade now, and has received enormous anonymous donations from throughout that whole time period. Many tens of thousands of dollars, more than $1 million in cryptocurrency he's exchanged back and forth with other people. One of the things that we learned in doing that story and in looking at the way he uses cryptocurrency was we noticed that he pays his employees with cryptocurrency, and he also purchases items to keep the site running with cryptocurrency. So we wrote about that. You can also, the way cryptocurrency works is not quite like a regular bank account where we don't know what people are doing in their bank account. With cryptocurrency, some of them, they have an open transaction ledger, so you can actually see the money going back and forth. You might not know who exactly it's going to or from, but you can definitely see the transactions. One of the cool things about tracking these guys, these white supremacist guys, is they make their donation address public. It's kind of like a P.O. box, right? So you can watch the crypto going into this known P.O. box, and you know who's taking the money. So that allows us to do a little bit of tracking. It's harder to tell who's sending it to him, but we can definitely tell when he's getting money and when he's sending it out, and who he's sending it to sometimes. So from that, we're able to keep, sort of logs like you see on the screen, but we are also able to build out networks of who's sending to whom. And yeah, I'm not going to share some of those. I'm not going to share some of those right now,
Good. Thank
but
you.
suffice it to say, the networks are being built. And then, of course, we take that data about what we learned from those networks and cross-correlate that with what we know about location, and you start to see patterns emerge. This is a very long process, but it's kind of fun and interesting. Let me see if I can. Dan mentioned domains, and the dailystormer.com domain was the first one that Andrew bought back in 2013. These are some of the other domains that he's had to move to after dailystormer.com got shut down, and he has tried a variety of different extensions, everything from Hong Kong to SU for the Soviet Union to now he's running on .rw domain, which is from Rwanda. So he's trying a bunch of different tactics to try to stay online, and he is constantly moving around. That might not seem like a big deal at first. A domain move takes a couple of hours, to propagate through the internet. It's not that big of a deal, or is it? So this has been one of my big research questions that I've been interested in for a while. Like, when he has to move like that, what's the damage? Like, what does that do to him? Does it do anything at all? So I collected all of the data for his traffic rankings, his popularity of his site for those almost 10 years now. And I'm going to show you if this will come up. There we go. This is one plot of many, many graphs of this. This is one plot that shows some of the impact. I'm going to walk you through this graph so you can see that this work, even though it's tedious and takes forever, and they keep me in a closet with like the lights out and stuff to get this work done. But it actually can have an impact. So if you look at the graph here, we start over in 2017 time periods. I just cut the data down to be concise. But you can see in the blue, we have the .com domain, and you see that giant spike kind of near the M, right? That was August 12th, 2017, the date of the Unite the Right Charlottesville tragedy. And right after that, the day after that event, Andrew was finally removed from those services, Cloudflare and the GoDaddy and Google and some other ones that were supporting him and hosting him and enabling him, really. They finally cracked down and cut him off, and you can see the giant traffic numbers fall, right? They fall away. Now the question is, well, that's to be expected, but when he rebuilds the site on the next domain, do those traffic numbers come back? And the answer was no. When you see that next bit there, the .red domain, he tried, dailystormer.red, and you can see the traffic numbers never rebounded. In fact, they didn't even get to the halfway mark. Like it was terrible for him. He then had to rebrand again, traffic numbers fall, and once again, he has to rebuild. Now this time with the .name, he was able to keep that for about 2 years. So over time, he was able to get maybe to about the 2/3 mark of where he once was, right? But once again, he loses the site, has to rebuild again. So this is actually the process that we want. This is what we want to happen. We want him to constantly be on the run and having to rebuild, and most importantly, being unsuccessful at that. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to stop there, but we can leave that up just to be just to be gloating, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Megan, and thank you, panelists. We're down to the last 6 minutes and 27 seconds, and there's been one question that's come in so far. But Daniel, you've addressed it. It related to the recommendation from the magistrate judge for the bench warrant related to arrest of Anglin for defying court orders, and that's an ongoing process as well. You're waiting, you said, for the court to weigh in on this. And also, I know it could be a bit sensitive to speak on that right now in a more robust manner because of its ongoing situation. But I do, as we think about this panel and what we've talked about, as I heard you, I really thought about two aspects of what can we do moving forward. And this is one of the things the organizers, Laura Ellsworth, for instance, has charged us to think broadly beyond this 1 hour setting. And as I think about some of the things you mentioned, I think about this international component to Anglin's activities, this whack-a-mole game that you've discussed, Daniel, where he's moving from one server to the next, and Megan has this great depiction of where he's going to try to essentially continue the business of hate. And it's been hard, and it's hard because of the work that you all are doing. But what more can be done in the international space as it relates to tackling propaganda, taking more domains? Where would you love to see more cooperation internationally? And then thinking more inwardly, are there things that we can do legally, domestically, to make it easier for the next Tanya Gersh to win in court and to collect. So I want to start maybe going from Daniel back down this way for any thoughts on those issues or things that we need to be thinking about for the future that we can help tackle this problem.
Yeah, so let me start with I'll make just 2 quick points. I'll start with the international. Legal practices are national, not international. Laws, for the most part, that we deal with are domestic laws, not international laws in our courts. So we do need more help. We do need more international cooperation, both to investigate and to secure judgments. And to the extent people can start talking about that, there are a lot of folks who specialize on international issues. This is one very worthy of focus, because we are just going to get dozens and dozens of judgments against white supremacists. All, coming out of January 6th, there are guilty pleas, there are going to be convictions, dozens, just that one event. And it would be nice if the path to international discovery and judgment was clear. Domestically, we do have challenges trying to follow the money. With Megan's help, we're learning a lot, and we're able to do a bunch of things, but it's not like having a bank account. And I know there are difficult issues on both sides of this question, but one should look really hard about whether the secrecy that's being afforded cryptocurrencies shouldn't have to give way in the face of a judgment against a white supremacist. So let me just stop there, and those would be the things I would want people to look at.
Thank you. Megan?
Yeah, I would say in an international context, I mean, it is challenging. Crypto giveth and taketh away. Yes, I can see the blockchain, I can see the transactions flowing back and forth, but to actually take action and to do subpoenas and things that these guys do so well, that can be really challenging in this space. There's one company in particular, one cryptocurrency exchange called Binance, and they pride themselves on not having a corporate headquarters anywhere. And they do this so that they're not answerable, they're not accountable to any kind of legal requests and things like that. And it kind of boggles the mind that could even exist. But it does, and so that kind of gives you the idea of the scope of the challenge. These folks are living in multiple countries, they're trading in dozens of different kinds of currencies that most people don't even understand, and that's happening at the speed of light in a corporate environment that's definitely not cooperative and sometimes downright hostile. So very, very challenging space.
Thank you, Megan. And Beth, we're down to the last 90 seconds.
Yeah,
Beth and Tanya, 90 seconds between the two of you.
What they said,
There we go.
especially around especially around regulating cryptocurrency. It's just, you can't get, you can garnish things. We need, we're used to garnishing things, and we need laws to sort of catch up. And then I guess the other wish list I'd throw out there is, there are people who, I'd like to see laws that say if you knowingly receive money that's, that has been stolen, which is essentially what has happened here, you can be liable. You have to turn over that money. There's just not enough laws in this space because we've all grown up in the judicial arena of real money, and the world has changed, but the laws have not. So we need more laws.
Yeah, update the laws. And I think it's also a good segue to the panel after us that's going to talk about following the money, but they're going to be talking a lot about crypto, no doubt. Tanya, I want to give you the last word.
These are Nazis. They're literally the scumbag of our society. They are the maggots. They are the worms that belong back underground. Let's call it the way call it what it is. They are haters. There are not good people on both sides. They are bad people, and there was an entire war that proved that Hitler, we've learned lessons. We need to make it not politically incorrect to say and call it out that these are bad people. And we need to not tiptoe around the fact that we have a problem, a real live problem in this country with these bad people. And we need to figure out why, in this day and age, are kids falling into something so vile. So we need to take a good look at what we're doing wrong and not pretend that leadership doesn't influence it, and not pretend that this might not get worse, because of course no one wants to be a Nazi. Because we've been sitting in a conference the last few days that showed us it is getting worse. So if somebody is hurt, give them a chance to fight. Look for any opportunity to give them a chance to put these people away. And if you're already doing that, God bless you. You've saved my life. And you've saved so many other lives. And then thoughts and prayers, they're beautiful for a victim. They really are. But thoughts and prayers don't heal the pain. So take it to the next step. Just like we've discussed, let's bring them down. Let's hold them accountable. And then let's tell the world that this is not acceptable under any circumstance. Let's bring a little political correctness back into our country, and a little moral value back into our country, and call out haters for who they are. And that's not worthy of being American.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, panelists.
How about that?
Thank you, audience.
Take it.